My name is Chris Bosley. It's the 24th of May 2017, Wednesday at 5:47 in the morning. So I want to talk to you a little bit right now about some evidence that I found. I think that shows remote control and accessing of the phone on a chronic, like 24/7 daily basis by the Anglicans, Presbyterians, and Baptists that are training in hacking here at Moore Theological Bible College. So here is what I want to talk about is times. When I pull the battery, the time is not default. It is always changing. So I want to look at the Android boot process. The bootloader loads first. So when you turn on the machine, when you power on the device, the first thing that the bootloader is the first thing that runs. It takes care of like low-level hardware initialization, and so it first runs init-s, and that initializes stacks and does some housework and preparatory work before it calls main, and then bootloader calls the main function main-c, the main program initializing hardware like clocks and the keypad, console, and it does some other assorted things, in internal RAM, boot media, stuff like that. Now, the clocks is what I'm interested in, because that's what shows is always changing. So when I go into okay, so here we have this is what I booted up to this morning. So I booted up the phone, and the phone's clock said 1416. I'm reading from the first folder, ACCT. So the clock said on the clock of the title bar said 1416. Now it's supposed to be 2010, January 1st, 2010, 11 o'clock, but it's always changing. For example, on another day, it said 1816. Now on this day, when I shut the phone down, I pulled the battery, but before I pulled the battery, I cleared out all my recent applications, all of them. I cleaned them all out, and there was no recent applications, and I shut down all the apps. But then when I pulled the battery and then restarted the phone, all my recent applications came back. Now I think what happens is that my recent applications are being kept by another system. The configuration is being kept by another system that's controlling this phone. I think that is a system set up by the Anglicans and company. So when I started up, it said 1816. And when I shut down, there was no recent applications. But here we are, recent applications have been shown. They showed up as soon as I started up the phone. Another time was 12:32 on another day, 22:22, 13:39, 7:28, 12:50, 15:31, 14:43, 18:34, 8:09, 15:11, 11:02, 11 o'clock. Now that's the default, 11 o'clock. And sometimes it floats around 11 o'clock, but it very seldom is actually 11 o'clock. 11:06, 19:35, 5:37, and this is what happens. Now the clock is always different. So if the bootloader is running the clock, and if the bootloader is not being tampered with, why isn't the clock always the same when I pull the battery? I think this is indicative or indicating that the Anglicans and Presbyterians are owning my phone, that they monitor my phone, and it's chronic on a daily basis. What I mean is that on a daily basis, they're monitoring my phone, watching my activities, watching what I'm doing, and they're basically controlling the phone and seeing what I'm doing with it. And they did exactly the same thing with my computers when I had computers running. I don't have computers running anymore, but I used to have computers running. And I noticed this stuff from day one. So I think that this indicates that they connect to the phone, and that when I pull the battery, it severs a connection, which when I start the phone back up, it's taking their setting, and rather than taking the default setting of the factory setting. In other words, they override my phone's factory setting or something similar to that. Now this happened all the time. When I first got the phone, it didn't do that. For a few, maybe a day. I shut the phone off 3 or 4 times, maybe 2 days. But as soon as they got their hooks into the system and got control of the system, it changed, and the times are always different. Now it does not just go for this phone. It also happened with a Nokia, E71. When I first used the Nokia, I pulled the battery and it was default time. Everything was default, the way it should be. But then the times they got their hooks into the system, I saw a whole bunch of other evidence, and then that indicated they were in the system, a whole bunch of oddness, and then the system time was always different when I pulled the battery. Exactly the same thing happened with a Blackberry. When I first started using the Blackberry, it was fine. I would pull the battery, and because I don't want them controlling the shutdown process. So because I don't know what they're going to install or what they're going to do or what payloads they're going to install on shutdown. I don't want them executing anything on shutdown that's going to screw up the phone. So I just pulled the battery from the Blackberry too. And the first 4 or 5, it took them a while to get into the Blackberry, but I think it was about 3 days. But for the first 3 days, when I pulled the battery, when I finished using the phone and pulled the battery, I would start it up and it was default time. And the way it should be, the default factory time, the way it should be. But then they got into it the same way they've done into this and the same way they did with the E71, and the times were changing exactly the way they do with this Android. So I think what is happening is that they connect to the phone and then they root control the phone. They control the phone, and it's almost like they're the root administrator of this phone, and this phone just becomes like a shell. So I think that this is evidence of Anglican occupation in this phone's environment. And I think that they do the same thing with computers and other phones. Like I said, all of our phones have been controlled by them because they've been configured, and the configuration changes I never did. They did the configuration changes. So it's constant harassment and constant monitoring of all devices that we've had, all computers. And the scary thing is, and I've talked about it in other videos, they can access our computers after I remove the wireless and Bluetooth cards. So they're using a backdoor into the hardware of the motherboard. And I think that they probably have the same kind of entry into phones. So even though I have my almost all the time I have my Wi-Fi and Bluetooth turned off, I think they can access it, and I think they can access the phone even though my Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is turned off, and they can do the same thing. I know for a fact that they can do the same thing with all of our computers because I removed all the wireless and Bluetooth cards, and they were still accessing the computers and still configuring the machine, still touching files, and still changing file system attributes. You know, they were changing NTFS file attributes of external USB drives from read write to read only, so I couldn't write to my drives. And then as soon as they did that, I would hear them laughing next door. So this is another example. Like I said, the boot times of the phone, I think is another example of Anglican occupation and control of the phone.